the things that drew me to self-regulation was when I heard Stuart Shanker say something like, when you see a child differently, you see a different child. He's also largely responsible for the quotation that there is no such thing as a bad child. And as a teacher in the early years, I have to say, I started wondering, I don't know that that's true, but so I had some questions initially, but when I attended some of his workshops and some of his talks, the way he described it began to make total sense to me, is that it really is a matter of the relationship you create with the child that that really determines whether they are going to tune into your voice and your co-regulation, or whether they are going to be a ticking time bomb that is ready to explode. So I want to be very, very sure that you all understand that this tuning forks and time bombs is something I'm going to talk about throughout the presentation. Now I want to ask Andrea, the screen that I'm sharing, it looks like the gallery view is right in the middle of the slideshow. Is it doing that on everybody's screen, or everybody is just seeing the slides?
Just seeing the slide.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. So again, I put this blank slate up there because again, there's nobody I enjoy talking to more than early childhood educators, because you use your imagination. You can see a better community, you see a better child, you see a better world. So this blank slate represents your imagination, and the fact that you're here participating in this Congress to me indicates that you are interested in making improvements and making changes for the better. So, and again, I thank you for taking part. What I hope to do tonight really is I want to share a little bit about the context of self-reg in the classroom. I want to identify two very important variables that I started to pay attention to in my classroom, and I saw that it made a very big difference in how I responded to the children and how the children responded to me. I'm going to talk a little bit about brain science, but in a very simplified way. You don't have to get worried and sign off right now, because I'm not a neuroscientist. I don't pretend to be a medical doctor, a brain doctor, but I do have a bit of understanding about the brain science, and I hope to translate some of what I understand about that. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about stress responses versus misbehavior. So much of what we see in children, and I myself was guilty of it as a kindergarten teacher. I used to talk to children and say, oh, you know, Joey, you made a bad choice, or Joey, you could have done better, when in fact, it may not have been a choice at all. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between making choices and reacting, which is very different. And then I'm going to talk about that interaction between the teacher and the child. And if you have any questions, by all means, please don't hesitate to make a note of your question. We can talk about them after, or you can put them in the chat room. And I believe Andrea is going to keep track of those questions, and we can address them a little later on. So we'll get started. I know this topic about challenging behaviors, some people are wondering whether we are in the midst of an epidemic, whether we're seeing an increase in challenging behaviors among children. And I can tell you that the numbers were already starting to escalate. We were seeing an increase in numbers dramatically in terms of anxiety and depression among children, even before the pandemic. And these past 2 years have only exacerbated or made that even worse. A recent report that I don't have quoted here in my slide was that between the ages of 14 and 17, approximately 1/3 of the children between the age of 14 and 17 are demonstrating some symptoms of excessive anxiety. So that's one out of every 3 children in our classrooms are experiencing some form of anxiety or anxiousness that might be causing them to act out in a way that is what we would call maladaptive or not healthy for them. So that can be a little scary when we're looking at those numbers. I know if we include children aged 4 to 17, the number drops to, instead of 1 out of 3, about 1 in 5. But if you ask me, that's still far too many. That means in a classroom that I had in kindergarten that had 20 children in it, you know, 4 4 or 5 of those children were experiencing some difficulties, which is still way too many in my opinion. First, I want to talk about those 2 variables. One of the things that I began to recognize in terms of Schenker Self-Reg is that we all have varying energy levels. We can wake up in the morning and be full of energy, and then at the end of the day, we can have very little energy. And sometimes we go through these cycles throughout the entire day, these high energy and low energy cycles. We also have times during our day where we have very little tension or stress, and other times during the day where we have somebody come and drop something on our desk and ask us to do something, or we have demands placed on us that escalate our own stress levels. So we can have either high energy or low energy, high stress or low stress. But what was surprising to me was when you put those 2 together, you create these 4 quadrants, what I call 4 quadrants. And this is demonstrated in what we call the Thayer matrix. And I'm going to show you that slide in just a little bit. But when you start to look at energy and tension in 2 different variables, but on the same screen, somebody who is in, for example, this bottom right quadrant means that they have very little energy, but they are high in tension. They're experiencing a high degree of stress. They're going to respond very differently to a child who may be acting out than somebody who might be in a high energy, low tension state. So if I'm full of energy and I'm not very stressed, and I see little Joey who is doing something that he shouldn't be doing, I can redirect him a little more easily than if I'm, I have no energy left, I'm very tired, and I'm already feeling very stressed. So those 4 quadrants are something that I'm going to come back to. But I want to maybe take a step back and explain a little bit about how Stuart Schenker described stress to me. And this was something that really helped me look at this as well. And that is, he used the example of a thermostat and a furnace. And I don't know whether you heard Susan or Stuart in their talk last week, or whether they used this example at all about a thermostat and a furnace. But if you can imagine, we all have this set balance that we put in our thermostat that gives us our, what they call homeostasis. That is our balance point. Anytime the temperature goes above or below, the furnace kicks in or kicks off so that we can go back to that homeostatic balance, that homeostasis, where we stay nice and balanced. Now, in the case of stress, we all have a same stress balance point, but it depends on what's happening to us during that day that causes us to burn energy to get back to that homeostatic balance. So if something is happening and causing us to burn energy, we can have a very strong reaction, and then we all of a sudden become very tired because we burnt all this energy trying to get back to our homeostatic balance. Does that make sense to everybody? Am I talking about something that Stuart Schenker had explained already very well? I hope so. But that's really what resonated with me when I heard Stuart Schenker talk about stress and homeostasis in that way. And I got looking at these 4 quadrants, and that was something that really resonated with me. So here's that Thayer matrix, and I want to point out to everybody that on some of these slides, you will see the Merit Center logo in the bottom left-hand corner. I'm circling my mouse around it right now, and that's because some of these slides were taken directly from them. On some other ones, you will see an image of a brain that I use, blue brain, red brain, and gray brain to kind of remind me of what the work that I do. I also want to let you know that these arrows that I've added here between those 4 quadrants that I talked about were things that I added on my own because we move through these quadrants every day throughout our entire days. So those were not something that Robert Thayer did on his own, or that Susan Hopkins or Stuart Schenker did. I added those arrows to describe to people that I understand that people move through those quadrants throughout our entire day. And again, you can see the 4 quadrants. There's high energy, high tension, which is a state you want to be in when you're meeting a challenge and doing very well. High energy and low tension is typically a state that you're in when you are playing and relaxing and enjoying yourself. Low energy and low tension might be a state where you are actually sleeping or restoring or recovering your energy level. And this bottom right quadrant, the low energy, high tension, is when we tend to get those explosive behaviors that we see in some of the students and some of the children that we work with. So here's the brain that I was telling you about, this model of a triune brain. And I think Susan or Stuart might have showed this to you as well last week. And we talk about the brain's reaction to stress. But the most important part here is that this gray brain part is the part that controls our involuntary responses, our heart rate, our respiration, and things of that nature that we have absolutely no control over. The red brain is our limbic system, which is the home of our fight or flight response that you may have heard about last week. And the blue brain is the home of our appraisal, our prefrontal cortex, and where we are able to make decisions and choices. So these three brains work together, but it's this red brain that is the key gatekeeper, because if we are feeling stress or tension, this sends the message to other parts of our body. So for example, when we feel that fight or flight response, we are inundated, or our body is injected with cortisol and adrenaline, and so much so that our muscles begin to tighten up, our breathing accelerates. Sometimes our pupils will dilate, and our digestion will slow down, because our body is conserving energy so that it can use it in survival mode. So that it's that back and forth between the red brain and our actions that are very important. So this is what I call a stress hierarchy. So when we are experiencing severe stress, we are in this low gray brain area. That's when we go into freeze, which is even beyond fight or flight. So when we are so immobilized by the stress that we experience, we tend to shut down. And we can sometimes see that in children that are already stressed, and we continue to push and continue to push, and they just get very quiet and they shut down, or they might even become compliant, but it's a different kind of compliant. They're doing something to just kind of get out of avoiding the tension or the stress of being yelled at any further. So they're not really in a healthy position, but they are in what we call gray brain or freeze. The red brain is where we see some mobilization, where we get activated. We are either in fear and we want to escape, or we are in fear and we want to react and fight back, and which is again the home of where we see some of the reactions in some of the children that will be stressed in classroom when we ask them to do something that maybe they're not capable of doing. Maybe they're tired, maybe they don't want to look bad in front of their friends if they don't know it, or maybe they just didn't get a good night's sleep. There are any number of reasons why they can be in this red brain state, and then we're the one that's asking them to do something, so we can get these very, very big reactions. So we have to be very careful about that. And then of course there's the prefrontal cortex, the blue brain at the top, where that's where we do our reappraising and our reevaluating, and we engage socially. So in these particular slides, these children, and you can look at these children, the reaction in these children's faces. This boy here, these are funny slides, and I don't mean to make fun of the children, but I've included these. This was a picture of a child, a friend of mine sent me, saying he was mad because I wouldn't let him eat the garbage. So do we think the child was really mad because he wanted to eat the garbage? Chances are the child was having a very big reaction. And a lot of people will say, a lot of people who are parents who have seen their child react in a certain way will say, well, they're just tired. And that makes perfect sense. They're tired because they are burning energy. Their body is burning glucose to get them back to a balanced state. So they have no energy left. And that's when we see the big reaction. We see the big meltdown when they are pushed beyond their limit. This other girl here, she wanted, sorry, I went too far. I'm going to go back just a little bit. This one girl here, Again, her father sent me a picture. She wanted to go in the dishwasher. And when dad said no, she was very upset because she couldn't go in the dishwasher. Instead of taking a bath, she wanted to go in the dishwasher. So a couple of funny examples. I'm going to skip by the next couple slides. So really what it boils down to is identifying the difference between misbehavior and stress behavior. Now, a misbehavior is something that a child has a choice and knows the difference between right or wrong and still decides to do something that they know has not very good consequences. Now, there's a fine line between that and stress behavior, because a lot of times we look at children's behavior and we think, well, they knew the difference and they knew if they did this, that something bad might happen. So they should have known better. But again, I encourage you to look at what is going on and ask yourself, why is that child doing that? What is going on? What are the areas in their body that could be causing them stress or causing them to burn energy? Like I talked about that thermostat. And one of the things that Stuart Shanker and Susan Hopkins talk about are 5 domains, 5 areas in which children can be burning stress from. And the first one is biological. And that can be anything from not feeling well to having a tummy ache, having a headache, perhaps smells bother them, perhaps bright lights bother them, or again, perhaps they didn't get a good night's sleep or a restful sleep. Their emotional domain, big and strong feelings. Some of them might have had a dispute or a disagreement with a very good friend of theirs, a close friend of theirs in the center or in the classroom. And that can be a stressor for them. The cognitive domain is something, if you ask a child to do something and they don't know how to do that, that can be a severe stressor for a child. And again, no child wants to be made to look like they don't know or they don't understand, especially in front of their friends. So that can be a stressor for them. The social aspect of it, getting along with their peers. And the pro-social domain is how they are seen by their peers or how they are seen by the teacher. Nobody wants to be seen as not being very good at something that they're doing. So those are the areas where, again, children can be burning energy, and that will cause this dysregulation and cause them to get out of that window of tolerance. Like I said, the thermostat, if it goes up a degree or down a degree, the furnace might not kick on right away, but if it goes up a few degrees, then the thermostat might kick on. And what we're finding is some children who have repeated this experience over and over again, and again, we're talking about those children who may be very anxious or have mental health issues or anxiety, high anxiety. Their window of tolerance, the number of degrees between when that furnace kicks in or not, might be very few. It might only be 1 or 2 degrees, and all of a sudden you get the big reaction when you do something very small. Where other children have a much broader window of tolerance, and something might happen, and oh well, that's not that big a deal. And then something else might happen. Oh, that's not that big a deal. But then the third thing happens, and all of a sudden, then you're seeing a big reaction. So again, that window of tolerance and that thermostat is a metaphor that I like to use when explaining stress response versus misbehavior. Unfortunately, what happens is when a child is unable to get out of that stress cycle, it becomes a vortex. It becomes self-perpetuating. So I want you to think of a child who comes to the center, maybe an early childhood center, and they didn't get a good night's sleep, so they're tired. Maybe they sat down to have breakfast and they couldn't have their favorite breakfast. Mom or dad maybe was in a hurry to fix them breakfast, and they couldn't have the favorite breakfast that they wanted. They had to get ready for school in a hurry, and they couldn't put their favorite sweater on because mom and dad and dropped them off at school, and they didn't get an extra hug from mom or dad. They come into the center, and maybe the friend that they were looking forward to seeing once they got there isn't there that day. and then maybe they drop their backpack. So you can imagine all these things start to add up. And I don't know, Andrea, maybe you can help me. A Jenga tower. Do you know what a Jenga is? That game where you pull the blocks out. So all those little blocks are being pulled out, and all of a sudden he gets to school, and you're the teacher who's going to say, oh, you know, you have to put your backpack on the hook, and all of a sudden that child becomes, you know, explosive at the simplest thing we asked them. But that's because there's been this cycle that's going on, and then all of a sudden the teacher gets mad and raises her voice and saying, you know, Joey, you shouldn't be so upset. I just asked you to put your back. Well, that again starts that whole cycle over and over again. So we're in for a day of a stress cycle that can only continue to get worse until we take some time to let the child calm down and help them find some calm. So that's the point I want to get to now, and that's the important reaction. As Stuart Shanker said, that the fundamental unit of development is the dyad. This was myself when I was teaching kindergarten, and this little girl here, Maya, used to love working with me, and she used to, I mean, her smile used to light up the room, and whenever I put challenges in front of her, she used to get so excited to tackle these challenges and then show me what she could do. So, but I really felt like if I didn't spend time getting to know this little girl, because there were times where she had some very, very difficult entry points in the school and coming into the building, that I wouldn't have got the results out of her had I not taken the time to spend to really get to know what were the things that triggered her, what were those stressors that she was dealing with. She was being raised in a house where dad was not present. It was a single parent family. She had an older sibling, and the older sibling was very demanding and was on the autism spectrum. So that child got a lot of mom's attention, and this little girl didn't end up getting a lot of mom's attention. So when she was coming to school, she was already in a very heightened state. So I had to work extra hard to build a relationship with her to get the best work that I could from her, and to create a relationship that was going to help her navigate her day. So Dr. Jean Clinton used to use an expression that we have to connect before we can correct. And that's so important. When we build these relationships, we're able to work with children and help them understand that their emotional roller coaster ride is something that we can help them navigate until they can learn how to navigate it themselves. It's a roller coaster ride that they can certainly help to control. It's not necessarily something, and I use the word control there, and I just kind of caught myself saying they can control, because we can't always control what happens to us, but we can always control how we react to it. And it's a matter of knowing where we are. So when we teach this to children, and I used to teach even to my kindergarten children, I used to talk about energy and tension, and we would have that Thayer matrix on one of our bulletin boards in our class, and we would do a morning check-in, and I would ask the kids to go put their name tag where on that, in which quadrant were they feeling like they were in at that particular point in time when we did our morning check-ins. And some would go right away to, oh, I'm very tired and I'm not happy. So they would put it in the bottom right quadrant, or, oh, I'm great. I'm here, I'm happy, I'm seeing my friends, and they would put it in the top left quadrant. So that was kind of our daily check-in. So this is something we can even do with kindergarten children and show them how to navigate their own emotional roller coaster ride. I shouldn't say control their own emotional roller coaster ride, but at least help them navigate that. And when I talk about creating a relationship, I refer to it as the children bouncing off of your energy. Those of you that work with young children know that if you go into your classroom or go into your room or your work setting and you're not at your best, your energy is tangible to the children that you work with. So this model here is what I call energy-centered teaching. And it really has four windows to it, and that ECT stands for energy-centered teaching. But it also happens to fit in very nicely with the end of each of these words. And this is something that Susan Hopkins and Stuart Shanker published in their book, Self-Reg Schools. But the first step is to protect, making sure that the children are safe And I'm going to talk a little bit about creating that sense of safety with children who are explosive and who have anxiety issues in just another slide or two. We also want to connect. So there's protect, which is keeping safe. We also want to connect, which is creating that relationship with them. And then we want to collect, make sure we're all together and we're all on the same page and working together. And then we want to detect what the stressors are. We also want to be able to determine what is happening with that child and what they're going through. So I use those four in terms of helping guide my teaching, and we call it energy-centered teaching. So I've used this before. I talk about children feeding off of your energy, and on my first slide, I talked about tuning forks. There's something we call limbic resonance, where children feed off the energy that you provide. And I know when I was studying to become a teacher, we used to call it a group dynamic. When you get a bunch of kids in a classroom with an adult who tend to feed off of each other. And if one is high energy, then the others tend to escalate. And if one is not feeling so good, you see it in babies all the time. When one starts crying, sometimes another one will start crying, and then a third one will start crying. So there's that limbic resonance where they begin to communicate. I want to show you a video here. It's just a couple-minute video. Some of you may have seen what is called the still face experiment from Harvard. This is a more recent version of the still face experiment. So we're seeing a young mother here, and I want you to pay attention. I'm going to stop it at one point and ask you to notice something. You can see the interaction between the mother and the child. Child's not getting the response from mom. And notice how the child now looks at the cameraman. Because the cameraman is there, and the child knows that if I look at the cameraman, I might get a reaction from the cameraman as opposed to mom. But the hands start twitching, the feet start kicking a little more actively. The baby starts vocalizing a little more. And again, there we see an example of that still face experiment. But the nice thing about this particular example, and as hard as it is to watch, and because I've found it hard to watch at times as well, is that at least at the end, the child gets a chance to restore with mom. There's that reconnection is built. There are cases, unfortunately, where children don't get that chance to restore. Here's another very short video, and I've got this one on a loop, so it will keep playing over and over again. But I want you to ask if you think this child is either making a choice or if he is overstressed. Anybody have any answers they want to put forward? I think it's pretty obvious. We can tell that child is overstressed. Here's another one. Oh, wait, sorry. Here we see a child throwing a book at the adult who's sitting across from them. And again, so we see a child who is overly stressed, and probably reacting to the demands that are being placed on them. They're not choosing to do that. There is a set of circumstances that were put in place. So when we see a child differently as being stressed and reacting in a way and not making a choice, we can treat that child a little differently, because when we see a child who's making a bad choice, we tend to want to punish. When we see a child who's reacting because they're stressed or they're in toxic stress, then we tend to want to help, and we try to want to help them calm down. And how we do that is by cueing safety. And this is what I was really building towards. When you create this relationship with the child, really what you want to do is use language that is simple and understandable. You don't want to get into a long explanation about what the child should have done. You want to simplify your language. You want to attune to what the child is telling you. That's the A in safety. You know, let them know that you understand, but you're there reading their signals, what they're saying. And sometimes that means not getting directly across from a child, because I've been, before I knew Self-Reg, when a child was reacting very physically, I made the mistake of getting down right in front of the child and kind of putting their hands in mine and staring. And sure enough, that child lifted their foot up and kicked me and caught me right in the nose. So the child was sitting on a bench. So and it can happen if you're sitting directly across from them. So what you can do is sitting beside the child. So you attune to what the child is telling you, their emotional state, whether they just need space and time. Maybe you don't want to intervene or intercede right away. Of course, if somebody is in danger of being hurt, then you obviously intervene right away. But if somebody just needs some time and you've kind of separated them and de-escalated them initially, it might just need some time. So you follow the child's lead. That's the F in safety. So, you know, maybe waiting and patiently waiting for a little longer. You might not have to deal with that situation today. Maybe tomorrow might be soon enough. The E, you want to engage the child with a tone of voice that cues safety. You don't want to use a tone of voice. Sometimes you can lower your tone of voice. You can use a softer voice, and you can talk to a child this way that is not in a non-threatening way. So you're not using that tone of voice that really calls attention to the fact that you want to engage that child right now. So you can soften it a little and use much softer tones, and you'll see that will pay dividends. And again, T in safety, taking your time, knowing that the world isn't going to revolve around this one incident. You can take your time, and then of course the Y, yield. Children will very often want to do what's right. They will want to give you their best. They know what they're capable of. They know what they want to do. And so if you try to force it, you're not going to get it. But if you let them come to you, then that's the Y in safety. But a teacher who is dysregulated, if you yourself on that energy scale are dysregulated, you're going to foster that dysregulation in the children in the classroom. They will feed off your energy level. But a regulated teacher will get far better results. So really we have to monitor our own regulation before we can ever co-regulate. I don't know whether, I mean, in the past couple of years, nobody's taken a flight anywhere, but recently as we've started to travel again, when you get on a plane, the airline attendant or the flight attendant will tell you if there's a cabin pressure change, put your mask on before you put the mask on your children. Well, it's the same with self-regulation. If you're not in a position of regulation, of being regulated, you're not going to be in a good position to regulate the children with whom you work. So I'm going to show you another video here, and this is a worst case scenario. I showed you that still face experiment where the child had a chance to recoup and restore with mom and repair that relationship. This video is I think it's about 5 minutes long, 7 minutes long, and it shows the long-term effects of traumatic upbringing, traumatic events that happened in the early childhood years of some of these adults. And some of you may be aware of a study called the ACE studies, the Adverse Childhood Experience Studies. Well, this is something that it's called Step Inside the Circle. And it's a little difficult to watch, but it's about 5 minutes. And then there's a follow-up 2 or 3 minute piece at the end that I want to show you. This is what we're trying to prevent.
It's time now, everyone. We're gonna do the compassion trauma circle. Is everyone ready to face their past with compassion? Is that a yes? While you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life, if a parent or other adult in the household often or very often would swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or threw something at you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured, step inside the circle. If you often felt that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, step inside the circle. If your family lived in extreme poverty, step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle.
There is no shame. There is no shame. There is no shame.
Now, what's scary about that video is that it was done very recently, obviously, but it only took her I think I heard it was 14 questions that she asked. Oops, it's going to start again. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. It only took her 14 questions to get to the point where the circle was so small that those men couldn't move anymore. So only 14 questions, and they all had those things in common, those early childhood traumas between the time of birth and 18 years of age. So there's a little bit of a follow-up. And this was shortly after that trauma circle.
I'm so good. Good to see you. How are you? Amen. Noel, good to see you. Welcome. I was abused as a young girl. I was beaten by my mother. I was verbally abused by my mother. I was sexually abused by another man. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was a rageaholic. I've driven drunk. I've sold drugs. I was a juvenile delinquent. Probably my story is similar to most of your stories in here. I'm white and I'm female and nothing happened to me. So, I got a get out of jail free card. And so I'm here now because I see myself in every one of you.
I'm a traumatized child, raised by a traumatized child. My mother was traumatized as well as her parents.
Like he said, we wasn't born in the world of being evil people. My mother didn't want me. She hid her pregnancy. She tried to flush me down the toilet. But as I learned about these things, I always asked myself what was wrong with me.
When I come to the circle and I see everybody else and she's reading off the questions and people stepping in further, and I look at my childhood and I'm like, a lot of these people in this yard are just like me.
There was one step I should have taken that I didn't take, and I saw some of my brothers and my friends take that step, and I felt like such a coward You know, I wasn't brave enough to be there with them when they took that step. And every round after that, I took the most difficult step.
Our traumas kept us separated. We were all on the circumference, all standing apart. But once we began to acknowledge our traumas publicly, it brought us all closer together.
In prison, you're not supposed to show your weaknesses in prison, though. But to want to do that, to walk in that circle like that, and to take each step forward was a reminder to ourselves that we still have a humanity and we worthy to be loved, though. Most people on the outside don't understand that we want to change so we can re-enter society better than what we left it.
And I think one of the things that when you was yelling that no shame and you had us yelling it out, it was freeing us too. And it was
I'm so good. Good to see you. How
Sorry.
are you?
out, it was freeing us too. And it was a point to where when I was looking at that and we was all looking at it in a circle, you can hear that echo, no shame. And that was very powerful, especially coming from a little lady like you.
I'm 76 years old. I've seen a lot. I don't like talking. I like to meet people that understand what's happening without words. And you one of them. Today has been one of the best days I had in my whole entire life since I've been out of these 40 years.
So 76 years old, and that day was one of the best days in his life because he felt a connection to the people that he was there with. The other one that struck me was the boy who said he was a traumatized child, raised by a traumatized child. Because we know, based on the early childhood science that we all understand so well, that those of us that work in the field, people who are hurting tend to hurt people. And what we want to try to do is intervene, and Self-Reg provides us with the tools to understand that we're not going to punish children for responding or reacting in a way that we may have previously thought was a bad choice that they made. Are there bad choices? Certainly. I'm not going to deny that there are bad choices. Not everything can be reframed to be a self-regulation issue. But when we start to look at children a little differently, we see very different children. So I know I spoke very quickly, and I apologize to Gracielle. Hopefully I didn't speak too quickly, Gracielle. But thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about Self-Reg and the anxiety that I see in classrooms. But the way that I respond now is very different than the way I would have responded when I first became a teacher. And I hope I'm taking steps to not traumatize children for just being stressed myself as an educator. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. If you have any questions, there's some information for you. There's the book that I referred to. There are all kinds of free resources available at the selfreg.ca resource library website. You can reach out to me by way of email if you have any questions, or if something resonates with you and you're not quite sure and your question doesn't get addressed tonight, by all means, you can feel free to email me and I will try to get the answer for you. I apologize if it takes a couple days or maybe a week to get back to you, but I will send you an email to let you know that I'm going to get back to you. And that's my promise to you. So thank you very much. I've enjoyed talking with you. I know I spoke, like I say, I spoke very quickly, but I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Joe. I'm kind of sensitive after those videos, but I will try to share the questions that the people have shared with us through the chat. So anyone, now is the time. If you have any question in Spanish, please write it on the chat of the session, or in the case that you speak English, you are able to raise up your hand and you can open your mic and ask the question directly. So we have here a question from Pilar. She shares, how can we deal with our kids' stress when we ourselves are overstressed? Is it okay to leave the room when we cannot deal with the situation?
Great question, because again, it's that adult who has to make sure that they're in a position of being regulated before they can ever hope to regulate a child. Can you leave the room? I wouldn't suggest leaving the children unattended, I'm not going to make that recommendation. But there are times, I mean, in Ontario, the kindergarten teaching model here in Ontario has 2 adults in the room, and I don't know what the ratios are in Mexico City with your early childhood care centers, the ratio of adults to children. But even if you need to step outside the room for a little while, if you've got somebody who can keep an eye on the children before you step back in, there are times we all need breaks. I've been teaching, if you include my college teaching years, it was mentioned in my introduction, I've been teaching for over 30 years. 30 years experience. Today at school, we had an incident where there was a little bit of a fight between 2 boys, and one in grade 8, one in grade 6, where I was dealing with the boys, and the one boy just wasn't understanding what the point I was trying to get across about this brain science that I've tried to explain to him. So I had to step out of the room myself and regroup and get my energy back so that I could say, okay, wait a minute, let me try this a different way. So I did end up leaving the room, leaving him to sit by himself, and then I came back in and I felt like, okay, now I can take a breath. Whereas if I had stayed in that room and tried to convince him and force him to see my way, it was like talking to a brick wall.
Okay, perfect. About the video, the still face.
Okay.
We have a question. Is it better to establish a wait time from the child to respond to text or using your cell phone?
That's a very good question as well. I love that question because cell phones are so prevalent. We're seeing them. My wife and I were out for dinner last week, and we sat at a table, and there was a family of 4, a mother, a father, a daughter, and a son, and all 4 of them had cell phones out. I don't think we saw a sentence exchanged between the 4 of them during the entire meal. So it was really kind of sad to look at that. But if you want to establish a protocol, it's fine to have rules. And I know one of the questions that you sent me prior to the presentation this evening was about screen time. I know, having not been a parent myself, I've never had to wrestle with this question, but I do have friends who have rules around the amount of screen time that a child can spend on a tablet or on their phone. So and that is something. But again, they mix that balance with what the child wants and what they feel the child needs. So there's a healthy balance of exercise, outdoor activity, indoor activity. There's a whole lot of social engagement and communication that goes on outside the phone. So they're not just relying solely on that phone for that interaction. And it's okay to have rules. I believe we as a human species are pattern seeking. We like to see patterns. We like regularity, and we like to know where the boundaries are. So if you just said, yeah, permissive parenting can be every bit as stressful as overly authoritative parenting. When you've got so many rules that the child doesn't feel like they can turn either left or right, and they constantly have to adhere to the rules, they're going to be very stressed. But if you have no rules, they're going to be equally stressed. So it's okay to have some rules, but it's also very good to be flexible with those rules and understand that circumstances change and situations change, and there's no one size fits all.
Perfect, thank you. We have another question. At what age can children already be aware of deciding to do something that it's not acceptable?
Well, I know Stuart and Susan talk about, and I myself have seen the benefits of teaching this model of self-reg and understanding energy and tension. And there's a book that I've used. Oh, I should have sent you a copy of the picture. It's called The Animals in My Brain. I don't know if any of you have heard of it before, but I've used it before with kindergarten kids, and it talks about Derek the guard dog, which is the limbic brain. Like he barks and sets off the alarm. And there's the wise old owl, which is the prefrontal cortex. So these animals, and I use that to talk to the kids about the brain science. So even at 4 and 5 years old, these children are learning neuroscience, some pretty complex things, but they're understanding that their energy and tension level matters, and it determines how they respond. Now, when does a child know that they shouldn't do something and still do it, that depends on the child. I've seen some children who, as early as 6 or 7, probably did something that they knew they shouldn't have done, but chose to do it anyways for what I determined was, I didn't see any stressors that were at play. I didn't see anything that was causing undue tension or depleted energy. I may have been wrong, but I have been witness to children as young as 6 and 7 who were, I believe, making choices that they perhaps shouldn't have made. But again, and how you handle those situations are, with consequences. But those consequences don't have to be catastrophic. They don't have to be humiliating. They don't have to be degrading. They don't have to be traumatizing. They can be rational, natural consequences for the child's choice. But it's when we try to impose those choices for something that the child knows, maybe not understands at that particular point in time, but intuitively the child knows when their buttons are being pushed and they're reacting. Some of you may have even asked your child, well, why did you do that? And they said, I don't know. And it's not because they're trying to frustrate you. It's because they really don't know. They're reacting out of some tension or some stress or some lack of energy that they just wanted to get out of that situation. They wanted it to stop, or they wanted to do something to exert some control over their circumstances and some agency that, they wanted to demonstrate their own self-control, their own agency over their own body. And very often that's the case. But when we punish them for that can be traumatizing.
Thank you. We have Beatriz with her hand up. So Beatriz, if you want to open your mic.
Yes. Joe, and what about kids 5 and under?
And again, what we do with children under 5 is we always make sure that we cue safety. We want to let the children know that, and I use that acronym SAF ETY, but there are ways that we can make children feel safe with our tone of voice, our non-threatening presence, just the way we communicate with the child, so that they know that first of all, they're not in any physical danger, but not in any emotional danger, not in any danger in any sense of the word. Their ego is going to be protected. Their sense of self, their sense of self-esteem and self-worth is not going to be damaged. I know one of the questions you sent me prior to the presentation tonight talked a little bit about what might cause this. Is it bad attachment? Well, Bowlby and his attachment theory explained a lot. I mean, Stuart Shanker and Susan Hopkins looked a lot at attachment, and they understood that disorganized attachment can sometimes lead to that window of tolerance being very narrow that I mentioned earlier. A child may be overreactive if they're sensing that there's a lack of attachment and when they're seeking attachment. So, in a young child, we want to make sure that they know that attachment is secure, that they are validated, they are safe in our presence. We see them, we hear them. So it's not just a matter of physical safety, it's emotional safety as well. And that's for every child.
But are they able to be conscious at that age?
Are they able to be, I'm sorry?
Conscious.
Cautious?
To select if they are going to behave one way or another.
Ah, okay. So even at that age, under 5?
Uh-huh.
I haven't seen it at that age. Very often I will see children that, again, I come back to this model all the time, like a child who is in those early stages, especially here in Ontario, where we teach kindergarten. Children start school at the age of the year in which they're turning 4. So some of them are 3 years old and they're in our kindergarten classrooms. And I've seen children who, again, my first reaction would have been, oh, they did that just to get my attention. But then I have to ask why. Why do they feel like they need my attention? So I started asking the question, why? Is it because they're not getting attention? So that's a stressor for the child. Maybe they're not feeling validated at home. Maybe there's older siblings. Maybe there's something going on in the house that is causing that child to want to seek attention in another way. So by my validating their attention and letting them know that I see them, I can feed that without punishing it.
Okay. Thank you.
So that, yeah, I guess that, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. We have two more questions. The first one is, are punishments recommended, or which alternative do you have to correct any behavior that we do not want, those challenging behaviors that we are talking about?
Okay. One of the criticisms we get of Self-Reg quite often is, are you going too soft on children? Are you not punishing them? And what I've found is, and again, when I talk about that safety model, or that safety acronym, yielding to the child, because children very often will want to do the right thing. I've seen children as early as kindergarten kids who acted out against one of their peers in a kindergarten class. I made sure that both children were safe. I intervened, spent some time with the one child who again hurt another child at that particular point in time. They did something and they hit another child, so we separated them, and I spent some time with the child who did the hitting. And lo and behold, after we were able to de-escalate the situation, I talked to him a little bit, and it was maybe an hour later, but without me prompting that child, he went over and apologized to his friend and said he was sorry because he wanted to play with that friend again, and he knew that friend was very important to him. So that to me told me that child really did understand that what they did was wrong. So I'm not opposed to consequences. I'm just very careful in meting out punishment. I don't like using the term punishment, but there are consequences. I mentioned the name during one of my presentation, or during my presentation, about Dr. Jean Clinton. If you ever get a chance to read her book, Love Builds Brains, it's another great book. She's a child psychologist here in Southwestern Ontario, but she's traveled all over the world. She is a very strong advocate for not using separation-based discipline. So for example, when I heard her speak about this, as a kindergarten teacher, I thought, oh my goodness, no, if a child is hurting another child, I've got to make sure that one child is removed and not allowed to play with his friends. Oh, sorry about that. Not allowed to play with their friends because they just hurt one of their peers. What Dr. Jean Clinton proposes is that you don't separate the child from the group, because that's what you want them to learn. You want them to learn more pro-social ways of interacting with their peers. So instead of separating that child, I brought that child closer. I made sure I was there with the child, but I modeled how to interact with their peers. And I engaged with their peers in a more pro-social way that was more constructive, more optimal, or optimal as opposed to maladaptive, I guess would be the terms I would use. I was modeling how they should interact. So it wasn't a case of separating the child to use discipline or punishment. It was a way of integrating that child and modeling for that child how we should interact. Now, again, to get back to the question about consequences, yes, sometimes there are consequences for their actions, and sometimes the consequences are that they may not be able to go to the play center that they want to go to at that particular point in time. That's a very natural consequence. They might not be able to do what they want to do when they want to do it. That's a very natural consequence, but that's not necessarily the same thing as punishment. And
thank you for that.
That's my perspective.
Yeah, I think the importance of the intention behind that, right? Punishments, yeah, we probably want to hurt or want them to feel bad, while consequences, we want them to learn something, right?
Exactly.
Perfect. And we have two more questions. They're still coming in. So we have, I'm sorry. How to identify when a child needs psychological intervention? What are the symptoms or behaviors?
Okay. A very good question. And that, yeah, I don't want anybody to think that I'm proposing that self-reg is the answer to everybody's problems. Do I believe it can help everybody? I absolutely do. I believe it is something that can benefit everyone by being self-regulated themselves and helping others to co-regulate. There are situations, and I use that example of a stress cycle because all the research shows, and I don't know if anybody or any of you are familiar with Barry Brazelton, his work on the arousal states, the 6 key arousal states. You go from asleep to drowsy to hypo aroused to alert and focused to hyper aroused to flooded. And if somebody gets into that flooded zone and stays in that flooded zone and doesn't come out of it, they're in one of those stress cycles, and that can be detrimental to their emotional well-being, their physical well-being, because the cortisol and the adrenaline that is surging through that body, we now know medically does long-term harm. Chronic stress is one of those situations that leads to future medical problems. There's correlations between diabetes, other digestive issues. I myself, when my mother was diagnosed with cancer, I underwent a bout of depression and chronic stress. And I developed celiac as a result of it. So that surge and that constant presence of that cortisol and adrenaline can be harmful long term. So we want to try to interrupt that stress cycle or that long-term chronic stress. And there are times where if you're seeing that child not coming out of that stress cycle, when they need intervention, and they might need professional help, they might need somebody beyond what we can provide in terms of that calming, soothing co-regulation that we provide in terms of making them feel valued and safe. I would very strongly advocate that we involve others and other professionals. We here in our school system in Ontario have a different tiered approach, and we make sure that we are aware of what tier that child is at and what stage we should intervene with perhaps a child and youth worker, a social worker, or perhaps even a school board psychologist, or make recommendations for medical intervention. So, but it's not unheard of to see children who are dealing with chronic anxiousness, chronic depression, that do require, and as we're seeing with these numbers, it will be very interesting. Those of you that are on this call that might consider doing a PhD in the not too distant future, this is going to be a cohort you're going to want to study because of the pandemic that they've just gone through, and the social isolation and the distance learning and all the way it's impacted us sociologically. It will be very interesting to study in the not too distant future. So there might be something there as well that we might start to see more and more of it. I know we're seeing elevated stress levels and anxiety levels in our schools already.
Yeah, thanks. And Yoriko asks, if a parent has already used punishment as a disciplinary method, how can they repair this? How can they repair the relationship between the child and the mother or the father?
Oh, you start right from square one. I would like to say you can wave a magic wand and make all the punishment disappear. You can't. I know when I discovered self-reg, I used to say, oh, if only I had discovered self-reg back when I started teaching, I would do things so much differently. But there's a famous quotation Maya Angelou said, when we know better, we do better. So punishments are a thing. When I was a little boy, I got spanked by my father. I did some things and I got punished. I got the strap when I was in school as a young boy. That was something that was used quite regularly when I was a child in the school system. So did I hate the people that punished me? No, at the time I didn't really understand it, but now I have softer eyes for what happened, and I realize, okay, I understand better now. So I'm not going to go down that road again and punish somebody in the future. So I wouldn't beat yourself up too much over having punished in the past, but you can always start to build that relationship right from square one again, by seeing value in the child and validating that child and affirming their very presence in your life and what they mean to you.
Perfect. And the last question, what if the stressor comes from a sixth domain? For example, the way you are a perfectionist, how can you regulate yourself or help a perfectionist child knowing that perfectionism will come along while trying to regulate?
Yeah. Whoa, another great question. And this is probably going to be the hardest one to answer. You saved this one for last, didn't you, Andrea? Being a perfectionist is one of those, again, one of those self-regulation things that I try to put a self-reg lens on it. When you don't see perfection, you tend to stress. You're worried about how others are going to perceive you. So I don't necessarily see it as a sixth domain. It's more of a pro-social and social domain kind of thing, because you're worried about how others are going to perceive you. You might be worried about how you perceive yourself. You might be worried about your own failure. So it could be any one of the 5 domains. I'm not going to try to build on Stuart Shanker's work. I'd be honored if I could, but his work on 5 domains, I think 5 domains is enough. But perfectionism is one of those things that is very difficult, because it's that lens turned inwards when you don't see yourself as being good enough. And that's almost borderline, again, requiring that second voice. Like, I mean, you can co-regulate that child all you want and try to explain to them that you see value in what they're doing. You think it's wonderful, you think it's great, but if they don't see it themselves, then that's going to add to their stress, and it may lead to again spiraling beyond what you can help through self-reg. So perfectionism is a very difficult one. You know what? I would really like to ask Stuart or Susan that question and maybe get back to you with an answer to that, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. And then we can share via email to all the ones that are here. And we can share as well as a small summary of what we have covered today and those books that you have recommended and the ones that you put on the presentation. So we will make sure everyone has all the information they need to go deeper on this and to learn more about self-reg.
Okay.
Okay,
well,
so
and I hope I was hoping today not to present you with so many answers, but hopefully to get you to ask more questions. And judging by the questions that you asked there, they were some very good questions. So thank you very much for that opportunity.
Yeah, we have another one, just the last one. Sorry about that. It says, do you use any kind of evaluation? Yeah, evaluation to
evaluation?
Evaluate. Yeah, evaluation or any battery or any test to, thank you, Almo. Do you use any test to evaluate or to the capacity at self-reg? Beatriz, I don't understand that question. If you...
We as a non-profit organization have to measure and measure the impact and the well, sometimes if they are learning something. So we are going to work with self-reg. Would there be an instrument that can measure, can evaluate if they are getting better at self-reg?
Nothing that I know that is an objective, quantifiable instrument that would measure their self-reg ability. If you know, for lack of a better term, there isn't anything that measures, but it would be all observational. So for example, in working with some of the children in my kindergarten class, after doing the lesson about the different animals in my brain, and after talking about energy and tension and using that check-in model in our classroom, in our circle time, when the kids come in and they put their little picture on, and I see little Joey, and I'm going to use my own name again, little Joey puts his face in the bottom right-hand quadrant, which is low energy, high tension, which means I'm about ready to blow. And then later on, I see Joey go and move his picture from one into the other. I might ask him, well, Joey, you know, I saw you move your picture. Why did you move your picture? Well, that's because, you know, when this happened, I was able to, you know, I would make an anecdotal note or an observation that child really understood. So, I mean, after you go through those whole group and small group kind of talks where you explain the brain science in a developmentally appropriate way, the physiological energy and tension levels in a developmentally appropriate way so that the children understand. You can make anecdotal observations about, are they able to express themselves? I don't know whether you remember, Beatrice, there was one of our participants in the Self-Reg course, Aviva Dunziger is her name. She wrote a blog and she shows a video of a boy who's in kindergarten talking about his amygdala was triggered. Okay. So I mean, here's a 5-year-old boy talking about a part of his brain, the amygdala, that got triggered by somebody doing something, and he knocked over his tower and he couldn't get his tower to stand up again. So I mean, that's pretty amazing that you've got a 5-year-old boy talking about neuroscience.
Yes.
And able to identify the parts of the brain. Are all kids going to take to it that quickly? Probably not, but they can use their language at their level to explain what it is that they're feeling. Okay. And I think the other thing that I didn't mention, and I should also mention, as well as the animals in my brain and the energy and tension, you want to do some mindfulness activities so that kids can attune to, how they're feeling, both on the inside and the outside of their bodies. We do breathing activities. We do sensation activities. How do your shoes, your feet feel inside your shoes? Can you wiggle your toes? Can you feel your toes? What does that feel like? And so you go through this whole body check-in where kids begin to identify, oh, you know what? And then they can explain to you, yeah, I felt really tight in my stomach when that happened. And that, again, gets them to recognize that there are certain feelings they want to avoid and certain feelings they want to strive for. And that calm, that balance is what we want them to recognize. When they're in that calm, balanced state is really what we want them striving for. And when they recognize that, and if you as an adult in the room, if you can find that teachable moment where you see a child who's achieved that calm balance and tap into that and say, oh, see how you're feeling now? That's what we want to get to. And I mean, and again, unfortunately, children at that age, they will very often mistake what feels good with what they enjoy. They might enjoy playing those video games or playing on their tablet, but that might not be the same as being calm and balanced. There's a very, very different. So that's a whole other presentation is on dopamine and how dopamine tricks the brain.
Okay. Well, thank you, Joe. I think this is very important to all the parents to see a different child in their children. And well, we hope to have you soon with another temas.
Subjects, themes.
Okay.
And Andrea, can you say goodbye for me?
Yeah, people are asking for that talk about dopamine and tricking the brain. So well, people are asking for more. So thank you so much, Joe.
I have another book here. It's called Hooked.
The Hooked?
Yeah.
All right. So we will add that to the resources to the people that are here. And thank you so much to everyone that joined today.
There it is there.
Hooked by Near. Perfect. I will add that to the resource page that we will be getting to all of you. So thank you so much. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for trusting in us and also for being here and work through for the first infancy. We know how important our children and we want a better Mexico. So thank you, Joe, for joining our mission and our vision.
Thank you all for the work you do with the young children in Mexico City. So bless you all for the work you do.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.